afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, First Impressions Count, the ROI of UX Design. We're pleased that you're all able to attend. My name is Jan Caggiano and I'm in the marketing group here at ICS, and I will be your moderator today. And before we get started, I just wanted to give you a quick outline for today's session. This presentation will run approximately 45 minutes with the remaining time for Q&A. You should all have the ability to submit questions during the session, and we'll certainly answer everything at the end of the presentation. During the presentation, we will have some polls, and we ask that you all participate. That will be really helpful, and I'll certainly give the results during the presentation as well. And in addition, just so that you know, all attendees are automatically muted. You can hear us, but we cannot hear you. And for those of you not familiar with ICS, just real briefly, we provide integrated custom software development and UX design for touchscreen, mobile, embedded, and desktop applications for leading companies worldwide. All right, let's get started. So today our presenter is Jeff LeBlanc. Jeff is our Director of UX here at ICS. He oversees the management of all client projects, and he has extensive experience developing custom Qt solutions with a strong focus on applying human factors principles to UX design. Jeff?
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much, Jen, and welcome to our first UX webinar of 2015. So to get started, I want to jump right in and start talking about first impressions, at least in the software world. Lots of folks out there, from what I've seen of our attendees list, are actually software developers, and typically these days a lot of software development happens kind of in the mobile world. So if you're developing a mobile application, it's probably of extreme importance to you to capture your user's attention. If you're developing an application, you want it to be used. That's how you make money, right? Well, one of the things that we found is that for mobile application, you have to capture your user's attention extremely quickly. And kind of the rule of thumb is you've got about 30 seconds from the time that you download that application, get it installed on the phone, and run it. If your application does not capture the user's attention in 30 seconds, you're done. Right? They uninstall it. They say, this isn't interesting. I'm going to go and download somebody else's app and see what it does. So 30 seconds is not a whole lot of time. So what is it that's going to jump out and capture somebody's attention? And the answer to that, honestly, is it's the experience. The experience of an application, that initial, oh, wow factor, that, hey, this does exactly what I want, that's what is going to make somebody use your application. And possibly more importantly in today's world of social media, it's going to be what makes somebody recommend that application to others. Because let's face it, if nobody uses your application, that's a failure. And all of the time and effort that you spent developing that app is basically down the drain. And nobody wants that. So the UX is something that's going to get people's attention. Lots of software projects fail, and this is certainly a hard thing for developers to really kind of swallow. Jen mentioned earlier that I do run our UX group, but I've actually also been a software engineer for about the first 20 years of my career. So I've worked on a lot of projects, and unfortunately I have been on some that haven't made it out the door, and I know that's very frustrating. There was a study done back in 2005 or so by the IEEE, and they noted a lot of different reasons why software projects can fail. Some of them can be from the get-go, the developers not knowing what the goals of the project are. Somebody starts down a pathway, and it's not extremely well defined. You don't have good system requirements, you don't know what your ultimate goal is, and you might have bad communication problems. The developers tend to work in a world of technology. Right? When I have my software engineer hat on and I'm down working with compilers and checking web pages on how to do things and whatnot, I tend to not be focused on the people who are using the software, the end users, which to the business people are also known as customers. And that is a potentially fatal disconnect for the success of a project. In terms of numbers, this study found that there was approximately $1 trillion spent worldwide on IT software. And again, that's 10 years ago money. And 50 billion of that was just by the U.S. government alone. Right? So say goodbye to your tax dollars if a lot of those projects are actually going to be failing. A couple of years ago, Human Factors International did an interesting study. They noted that about 15% of these projects just get abandoned. Projects get started, they go to a certain point, they don't complete. From a business perspective, that's frustrating. That's an immediate hit on your budget. That's money that you could have spent working on other projects instead. From the programmer's perspective, half the amount of time they spent on a project was done doing work that could have actually been avoided if more forethought was put into things. And again, when I have my developer's hat on, I know a few things annoy me more than having to do rework or work on something that's basically just going to get thrown away. So avoiding this type of waste is something that should be paramount in developers' minds. If you're a product manager out there, from the 2014 Pragmatic Marketing Survey, project manager folks have a different concerns than developers do. A good percentage of them are worried about their sales pipeline. Right? If the product isn't going to sell, again, that becomes a problem. Likewise, missing scheduled launch dates. Right? A lot of work goes into some big software releases, getting the word out there, hyping things, getting ready for trade shows. If you miss a launch date, that can, again, have a big financial impact. Even if the product hits the launch date, does it have all the features? Right? 28% of PMs notice that the features are actually not even being used by their customers. Again, that's development time that was a total waste. If you've ever downloaded an application or run a piece of software that has maybe a particularly crazy, clever help system, or just something that's a really kind of odd corner of the software that you use once in a blue moon, but it seems very intricate. If you're a developer, you might have thought, boy, I never use this, but some poor programmer had to spend a whole lot of time actually developing this feature. Again, that can be frustrating. 39% of product managers found difficulty in adding innovative features, whether that's from not knowing what the feature should be or just being able to get development resources to add the features that they actually did care about. Either way, it becomes a problem. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect out there on the things that are actually getting developed versus what customers are actually wanting to use and what it is that's going to make a difference in their day-to-day lives. So to be a successful project, how do we look at a project and say, well, I want it to be successful? What does that mean? First question, simply put, does the project ship? Right? Are we actually able to go from a set of requirements to something that is going out the door? If it makes it out the door, how long did it take? Okay, was it done on time? Okay, and on time also implies, was it done on budget? Okay, or did it slip? Did things take longer than expected? How much do we care about that? Once it gets out the door, is anybody going to buy it? If it's a crucial launch window, maybe it's a piece of software that it's really important in terms of sales to make it out maybe for a movie tie-in launch or for the Christmas season or a particular trade show. If it's out there, are the people that we're targeting still going to buy it? Right? If they buy it, do they like it? Are they going to then come back and say, hey, this is good, I want to get the next version of it? Okay, so do we have a loyal customer, somebody that's going to keep coming back? And again, thinking about the world of social media, the all-important thumbs up. Will they recommend the software to others? Is it truly going to be something that they're going to look at and go, hey, this is great. It's making a difference in my life. It's something that I have fun using. It lets me do my job more efficiently. You should use this too. Okay? That recommendation is like gold. Okay? All of the marketing emails in the world might not stack up to just a couple important recommendations to your friends. Think about this scenario. Okay, if you're somebody on the entrepreneur side, maybe you're responsible for deciding what features go into the product, or maybe you've got a brand new idea. Okay, we've got something new that we want to get out into the world. Okay, great. So let's go and get a software engineer involved. Okay, maybe you are a programmer already and you had the idea yourself. Great. Let's start coding. So the programmer goes in, their head's down for a while. Eventually, like all software projects, we hit problems. That's the nature of the game. At some point, something is just going to be harder to implement than we first thought it was, maybe because an API isn't well-defined, third-party SDK doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Boy, I just didn't think that this was going to be, something that I'd have to account for in my architecture, whatever it may be, but we're going to hit problems. We work around them, and eventually the software gets out the door. But unfortunately, once it's out there, then social media comes into play. People start to use it, and the buzz begins. And unfortunately, because we hit so many problems, we had to do workarounds, whatever it might be, the buzz is bad. And as a result of buzz being bad, our application tanks, and it takes our profits with it. Not a good scenario. Think it can happen to you? Well, unfortunately, it can happen to the best of us. One particularly interesting case that I remember hearing about, I think I remember actually hearing about this directly when it was in the news back in 2010. It was the case of Kevin Smith versus Southwest Airlines. Kevin Smith, if anybody's familiar with him, is a, shall we say, rather large individual by his own admission. And he actually had bought 2 seats on Southwest, but he ended up being on a different flight because of a change in his travel time, whatever it might be. But basically, he was trying to fit into 1 seat, and he felt he could. The airline didn't, and they kicked him off it. This was live tweeted. So his followers, of which he has tens of thousands, were all following this on there. And, there was the expected social media firestorm as a result. Anything happen as a result of that? Well, Southwest, who particularly had been doing extremely well for a long time on customer satisfaction, their CSI sank. For the first time in 10 years, their CSI sank in a time when other airlines who weren't necessarily as good airlines, at least in my opinion as an experienced business traveler, other airlines went up. Southwest went down. Do we attribute that to Kevin Smith's rants? Well, maybe, maybe not. There's the school of thought that says any publicity is good publicity. I'm not sure. All right. So, other stuff along the same lines. Keeping in mind this notion of how social media feeds into things. Same year, a group called Think Now did a customer experience report. They found out that from the people that they surveyed, 82% of them who have bad users are just going to pretty much vote with their wallets immediately and decide to leave. If there's a competitor out there, they will switch right over to them. Even more disturbingly, people like to complain. Go figure. 79% of them actually went to the effort of telling other people about it, whether it was by Facebook or tweeting or whatever it might be. 66% of them were even more vindictive. They wanted to actively discourage other people from buying from that company. So, again, it's a connected world. If people don't like something, they're going to let you know about it very quickly. And that can be problematic. So, we don't want this. Right? We want to try to avoid this notion of customer rage. We want happy customers. We want them coming back to us and buying our stuff. And one very, I won't say easy, but certainly useful way to do this is by applying user experience design. UX design, at least in my world, is that linchpin. What takes you from a project to a successful product. It's a subtle distinction, but it's a very important one. A product that is successful is going to have people come back to you. They're going to want to talk about it. They're going to want to tell all their friends about it. And by the way, people will actually even pay more for it. Okay? From the same study that I mentioned before, 85% of the people surveyed said they would pay more for a superior user experience. And I actually fall in that same bucket. The best example that I have is actually TiVo. I have satellite TV where I live up in the frozen wilderness of New Hampshire. I don't have cable, so I have satellite, and I had a DVR that was associated with the satellite receiver as kind of the baseline. It drove me absolutely crazy. I made it about 2 months before I called them up, and I said, you guys have to give me your TiVo version. It's like, well, that's an extra $10 a month. I said, I don't care. Right? I'm willing to pay that extra to have that additional good experience. So UX can be a moneymaker. Okay? It's something that you can actually market and basically show your customers as something that you can provide them for value. So this actually brings us up to our first poll question. So I've kind of shared my notion of it with you. I would like to know what you guys have to say. So how important is the UX design process and the resulting experience that comes out of this to your company? Is it very important, somewhat important, important enough, not important, or absolutely non-existent? So we are going to open up the polls at this time, and we will give you about 30 seconds to get your answers in, and then we'll talk about it. So, Jan, if you would.
Okay, I just launched it. Okay, so what we have here is 65% of you voted, 50% of you believe it's very important, 23% of you believe it's somewhat important, 32% important enough, 9% not important, and 0 non-existent.
Okay, well, good that we've got a 0 on non-existent. That's something. And it's nice to hear that half of you consider it very important. Okay? Again, we feel that user experience is a differentiator, and I will hopefully give you folks some data as we progress along in this presentation to try to back that opinion up. So, design is important. It's not just a good idea anymore. It's not really just a nice to have. It's very important from a business perspective, if nothing else. The notion that you can do something that will keep people coming back to you, that will help ensure customer loyalty, that is something that you can charge money for. These are all business issues. Right? Design is a creative process. Okay? Just like software design, it can be hard to quantify. How much of a price tag can we put on taking extra time up front in a project to spend time doing the software architecture or to do a more detailed user experience design. It can be difficult, but it's worth it. Good design, to some degree, can be considered subjective. This I'll know it when I see it notion. Okay, that is, again, that first impression, that gut feel that you have. While there is a certain subjective aspect to it, I would also like to stipulate that it is also quantifiable. If you take 10 people and have them use a piece of software and ask them how it was, and 9 out of 10 of them say, boy, that was really good, or wow, that was terrible, that's quantifiable. All right? So yes, there's a subjective aspect, but we can also start to quantify these things. So hopefully you fall into the percentage of design that's good, that people like it, and it makes your product memorable in a good way. The biggest example of that in modern times is, quite frankly, the iPhone. Okay, when that came out, I mean, we're looking at a decade or so gone at this point, it really changed the world. Okay? I remember having, I had a flip phone at the time. It was, it was a handheld. It was a small device. It had an LCD screen. It was clunky, but okay, yeah, it was usable. And I was not an early adopter of it, but I remember seeing the guys in the next cubicle who were early adopters bringing the thing in and showing it off and going, wow, that's really impressive. And this notion of making a handheld computer and basically putting it out there for them, every person to use. I mean, that was novel. It was groundbreaking. And it really did change people's expectations of what technology could be like. Nowadays, that's the state of the world. So many people have smartphones, whether they're iPhones or Androids or Microsoft phones or whatever they might be. People have tablets. Everything has just become so ubiquitous for this technology that now customers expect it. And this changes the world from a software engineering perspective. Time was, you could put out a piece of software with a clunky UI, and as long as it actually did the functions, it's like, yeah, okay, I got to jump through some hoops, but I can do what I want to do. Right? That was fine. Okay? But now customers care about those hoops. How many steps do I have to take? What does this thing do, rather than just the engineering perspective of how something does it. It's that how many steps do I have to do to make something happen? That becomes important to people. And again, it becomes a competitive advantage. There is a notion in the industry, and I've heard this called a number of different things. The term that resonates particularly with me is the notion of something called market maturity. And the notion of this is that when something is created, initially you've got innovation. Maybe it's hard to use, maybe it's clunky, but it's new. It does something that nobody could ever do before. And your first-time buyers are going to jump on that. Okay, that's your initial innovation. People start to then jump on the bandwagon from a production point of view. Other people enter the marketplace. There becomes competing products. Now it isn't okay to just do a certain thing. Now we have to start, instead of having a knife, we have to have a Swiss Army knife. It has to do multiple things. So now we're adding features into existing products. and the feature wars can continue for a long, long time. But eventually you start to run out of features. Now what do? Well, that's the point where things actually do start to compete on the notion of experience. It's like, okay, if everybody can do the same set of features, now I care about which one is easier for me to use, which one is going to let me do the same thing in the least amount of time or the fewest amount of steps, or that I don't have to call in on the support line every week because I can't figure something out. That's when experience starts to matter. And eventually, even then, you get beyond experience where there's just everybody is used to using a certain thing and it becomes ubiquitous. But if you know this curve is out there, and if you can take advantage of it, you can leapfrog your competition. And this is, again, to go back to the T-Valve, something that they did extremely well even from day one. I remember when the first TiVos came out. And at the time, the DVR was all but unknown, so it was still a pretty new and innovative concept. It was an amazing leap over the notion of the old VCR, which I think I may still have in my attic somewhere. But the TiVo guys looked at this notion of experience from day one, and they were already up that curve of creating a piece of software that was fun, it was innovative, it was easy to use, it let me do things I couldn't do before and in a cool way. And then as other competitors entered the marketplace, okay, so they jumped in, these guys were still back at the features level. Okay, so you're seeing DVRs that, yeah, they did the job. Okay, as I'll reference my satellite provider from earlier. They did the job, but they still didn't have the cool experience that TiVo had. So I'm still willing to pay money for that TiVo experience. That's their competitive advantage. So this notion of experience out there is something that you need to start caring about. It's not just a good idea anymore. And in fact, in some industries, it's even starting to become mandatory. Okay? The medical industry in particular, highly regulated. There's lots of specs out there that have been coming out over the years that describe how human factors has to play in to medical devices. Okay? Again, it's not just a notion of creating a device that can take somebody's temperature or show their heart rate or possibly administer drugs into the body if it's programmed correctly. We have to take into consideration how these devices are used in the real world, what the experience level of the people using them are, what the working environment is, what happens if a fatigued user is using this device. How do we prevent errors by designing an interface properly so that somebody who is fatigued because they've worked a 12-hour shift can't make an accidental error? Those things now are actually starting to become documented and put into specs, and the software industry has to be aware of these things. So again, not just a good idea, but something that really needs to be focused on. So user experience starts to become your investment. Again, you're looking at the future. You know that eventually you're going to start caring about how the experience is and start working on it to begin with. So if you begin early, okay, if you spend time looking at the experience of your application, for starters, it's going to save you money just in terms of your development cost. Okay, I mentioned earlier from the IEEE study that lots of work is being done that could be avoided. Well, time is money, as they say. If we spend time up front on the user experience, knowing what customers are going to do, designing the important features, we can cut down our development cycle time by 30 to 50%. Okay? That's a big cost savings on any project. By saving on time, we'll inherently decrease our time to market. Again, sometimes products come out that are on a particularly tight timetable. There's a certain window that they have to hit, whether it's the holiday season or a trade show or just before the competitor can get out their product, which we've heard might be doing similar things to ours and we want ours in the marketplace first. Whatever it might be, we cut the development time down, we get to market first, that's an advantage. Research has shown that there are only about 5% of features that are used in a given product 95% of the time. That's a generalization across a lot of industries, but if you knew what your 5% of the features were and you could focus on them specifically, get them down well, get them done, get them out first, and then worry about the other percentage of features that aren't going to be used a whole lot, again, that's a big savings. That lets you leapfrog your competition. Doing this will increase your revenues. Okay? I gave, again, the example of TiVo, just people being willing to pay more money for a superior experience. There was a study done back in 2006, and basically just a market study looking at portfolio companies, ones that were known to work with user experience groups or have their own internal UX teams. Basically, they employed UX best practices. These companies tend to outperform the market industries and were averaging, back in 2006, about 37% growth at the time. That's pretty good. Okay? Again, there is a very solid business case for spending the time on this notion of the superior user experience. A couple hard examples to give you. So first one from back in '94. This was back when American Airlines was doing some restructuring. They found that by making some changes on, I think at this time it was the website back in the '90s, they could make changes that would cut the development costs by about 60%. And again, huge savings in terms of the software budget and getting their software out there into the market. Move.com is back from 2001. They did a design update on their site, basically just changing around certain things, making it easier for people to enter information. They found that after this update happened, they got a 150% increase in their sales leads. And that's in terms of viable, useful sales leads, things that would actually lead to revenue for the company, just by changing around things on their website. Finally, more recently, Airbnb, very interesting company. They struggled for quite a while. Okay, at one point, they were actually considered to be a failing startup. They took some steps back. They started to apply what they considered design thinking to their company model, to their website, to the mobile apps, all the things that they do. Now they're making money hand over fist. They did this by putting design first, by spending that time and money up front to get that superior experience. So I've talked a lot about UX design kind of in the abstract thus far. Okay? And I made the earlier kind of quote about I'll know it when I see it. But how do I get there? What does UX design mean? What's going to happen if I apply it? So the little footer that I've had down at the bottom of my slide deck is explained a little here. These are some of the steps that we employ here at ICS for our particular process. And I'm not going to go into them in much detail here, simply because we'll be doing future webinars where I will get into more detail here. But some of the important pieces, knowing the objective of your software, and I mentioned that in the beginning of the developer disconnect where they don't necessarily have clear ideas of what the goals are and aren't communicating with their users. Understanding who the users are, okay? Knowing that you as a software developer may not be the target user. Okay? Understanding who it is that you're designing for helps you create your designs better. Knowing who that you're designing for lets you create some interesting design concepts which can then be fleshed out. They can be tested. Okay? It is possible to do testing on UX designs just like it's possible to test software. ICS has actually done a rather well-received webinar on the notion of UX testing earlier. You can find that on the ICS network if you're interested. And then finally, once you've got a good design, working with the developers to actually create the product. Going through this type of a process will save you money. There was a study done back in 2011 by the Point Clear folks that they found that every dollar spent on UX up front is going to save somewhere between $2 and $100 over the total cost of the life cycle of the product. Now that $100 might not be on the initial release, granted, but if you have products that go out there and they get into the marketplace and they're there for 10, 15, 20 years, again, starting out on a good foundation is going to be well worth it in the long run. So this actually brings us up to our second poll question. We would like to know that if you're interested in getting good UX design in your organization, what obstacles do you face? Right? So if you're trying to start a project and employ good UX design, do you have problems securing management buy-in for it? Do you have a lack of internal designers to actually help you with this design? Is there a knowledge and skills gap within your organization such that you don't necessarily have folks who have the right skill set? Are there other challenges in here that I might not have listed that are particularly challenging to you guys? Or is it simply you don't focus on UX design because you're busy working on other things? So we will open that poll up now. So Jan, if you would.
Okay. Okay, so far what we have is 25% of you, first of all, 71% of you voted. 25% of you believe securing management buy-in is an issue. 58% of you, lack of internal UX designers. 54%, knowledge and skills gap. 21% are some other challenges. And 17% of you don't focus on UX design.
Okay. Well, hopefully as a result of this session, you 17% might be willing to change your focus on this. I think it'll help you in the long run. But that's good to know. And actually for you folks who put in some other challenges, we would like to hear from you as well on that at some point. If you want to send us some information about what other challenges you are facing, we would like to talk to you later. We'll talk about that some more as we progress. So, for those of you that do want to work on UX and are interested in this, let me give you a little bit of a definition here. UX is kind of the term of art in the industry these days, but it's actually relatively new. User interface is what was taught, at least back when I was in college. So what's the difference between a UI and a UX? Well, simply put, all software has a user interface. It might not be an easy-to-use interface. It might not even be a graphical user interface. There's software out there that run telephony applications, for instance, where you have to speak into the phone and get certain things to happen. We'll probably use bank automated systems at some point. So all software has an interface, but the question becomes, how do you feel after using it? Is it something that you use it and you go, wow, this is really cool, this was really easy to use, this let me do what I needed to? Or is it something that you were frustrated with? It's like, boy, I had to go through 10 layers of prompts and I had to go through a lot of different things I didn't want to deal with, and I eventually just got frustrated and said, let me talk to an actual person. I really hate using this system. You know, depending on where you are in the spectrum, you're going to have different responses to the software. That's your experience. So a positive experience using software means that you enjoyed using the system, or ideally at least you did not dislike it. Because as we've seen in some of the earlier statistics, if you dislike something, you're much more inclined to tell other people about that negative experience. The positive experience means that not only would you use it again, but you would recommend it to others. You know, tell all your friends and family about this cool new software that you bumped into, this neat new product, whatever it might be. That's why we want to shoot for that positive UX. So UX is the big picture. Okay? The user interface is part of it, but a UX, the whole user experience has to include a number of things. It isn't just the raw pixels. UX designers have to look at technical issues, what can and can't be implemented by today's technology. I'm sure we'd all love to have a holographic interface system like in the Iron Man movies, but the technology's not quite there yet. So we have to design within our constraints. We have to look at the bigger picture of what other applications might be running on the system, if there's integration that's needed with other things to play nice with other apps on your phone or your desktop. How easy is it to install? A UX designer might be working with the release engineers to look at the release process. How quickly do I go from download this to the application is up and running? How many steps does the user have to jump through in terms of entering information to run an application or to make a sale or whatever it might be? Focusing on these things can help reduce support costs. Those get into business issues. What is the environment that a system is going to be used in? Is it something that's going to be an indoor system, or is it an outdoor system, or does it have to be a ruggedized laptop, or whatever it might be? How much is it going to cost to deploy that additional ruggedized hardware or produce a film on the glass screen to make it easier to read with solar glare? All of those big picture issues are things that the UX folks have to consider. So the end user is always of paramount importance to the UX folks. Okay? A UX team champions the end user, but you have to look at the business goals as well. So back in 2005, Mac maybe spent a whole bunch of time working on certain parts of their user interface in terms of the setup, settings, dialogue. And focusing on that, they were able to cut back their support costs by about 90%. Had nothing to do with kind of the main portion of what McAfee is, antivirus software, so it wasn't producing a better, stronger, faster antivirus engine, but it was dealing with issues of how does this get installed, how does it get configured, why are we getting all these support calls in, what are those pain points that we want to fix for our end users. Focusing on those saved them a lot of support money. That's the type of a big picture thing that the UX designers have to look at. Can software engineers do this? Well, yes and no. It somewhat depends on the skill set. The trick here is that software engineers tend to be more focused on other things. And this is going to sound kind of obvious, but they think like engineers, not necessarily like the end users. Right? And again, I say this with all deference to you engineering folks in the audience. I've been a software engineer for over 20 years. But when I'm in engineer mode, I'm very much focused on the how do I implement this? How do I fix this compiler problem? How do I get these screens done? I'm less focused on how is this going to be used in the field. An end user may have a different mental model than I do, how they think, how they view the world. And the best example of this will be to think of any family gathering that you've ever been to where you've had to explain what you do for a living to any of your non-technical relatives. How do you explain it in such a way that they understand what it is that you do? They have a different mental model, a different view of the world, and that can make it hard for a technology person to explain to a non-technology person. Engineers have different skill sets than UX designers. So again, they're focused on software itself, and as a result, a lot of times you get an interface that's only going to make sense to other technical people. Now, this is somewhat of a blanket statement, I grant you, and certainly that I've worked with software folks over time that have produced some very nice user interfaces. The flip side of that is I've seen a lot of really bad ones, and you just have to stop and ask yourself, how many bad user interfaces have you seen? Okay, nobody sets out to make a bad UI, but a lot of them seem to make it out there. Okay, you got to ask why. Again, it's just a different focus. But this is an easily solvable problem. Right? The question simply is one of integrating UX design into your existing software design process. This isn't something that's going to happen in a vacuum. You don't just say, oh, let's tack us on some UX at the beginning of this and life is good. It doesn't work that way. This is something where you have to look at your organization, see what the existing culture is, how receptive people would be to it, and you have to bring in designers that understand how software is developed, how things get implemented. Right? How do designs get produced in such a way that developers can absorb them and turn them into actionable things? Years and years ago, that used to be by producing massive design specs, and they would kind of get thrown over the wall to the development team and signed off on the project, and off we go. We've kind of, as an industry, realized that doesn't really work so well anymore. So accepting the reality that requirements are going to change over the course of a project or a project lifecycle, and working with designers, figuring out how to best provide designs to developers in an actionable way is doable, but it takes some time. And you have to create the right team that's going to be able to actually do this. You need designers who understand implementation. Right? You don't want designers who are just going to make some really cool looking design in Photoshop and throw it over the wall, and again, you're back to the holographic interface where it's like, we can't actually do that. Right? It's great to try to push the boundaries. Certainly, some of the best designs out there have come by pushing the technological boundaries. But again, at some point, the thing has to be implemented, and it has to ship. Your designers need to be able to work with the developers, and vice versa. It needs to be communication. It needs to be a two-way street. What does the design team need for requirements? What does the development team need for specifications? And everybody needs to be working together with a total focus on the experience of the end user, which, again, to remind you guys, end user means your customer, the people that are paying you bills. So we'd like to give you our final poll question before we start to wrap things up. For your particular organization, do you agree that your organization employs a good UX design process that process is effective and for you guys making you profitable. Do you strongly agree with that? Do you kind of agree? Do you disagree? Do you strongly disagree? Or are you in the case of, well, we don't necessarily have a process? So, Jan, if you would open the poll.
Okay, I'm going to launch it, and you have 30 seconds. Okay, so about 71% of you voted, and of that, 13% of you strongly agree, 38% agree, 17% disagree, 4% strongly disagree, and 33% of you do not have a UX process but would like to.
Okay. Well, for those of you who don't have a process that would like to, some good news. As you probably saw from the email invite, this is the start of a webinar series that we're doing, and one of our future webinars will actually talk about constructing a UX process and how to implement it and integrate it into an existing software engineering process. So stay tuned. Hopefully we can give you some info on that. Right. So to kind of start the wrap up here, you know, any particular development effort really comes down to your return on investment. And why do we do anything in the business world? We want a return on that investment. So when we're looking at UX and how much time we want to spend on it, there are a number of different ways that we can measure that ROI. You know, it can be the notion of giving us a competitive advantage. It can be the notion of lowering our development costs and basically improving our time to market. It can be going through and creating the products that we know that our customers want and giving us a much better level of customer retention. Or it could be all about building a brand. But whatever it might be, it's something that you want to, from a business perspective, focus on and be able to measure over time. Going through and applying user-centric design practices can help build your brand and can help build you equity in your company. If you take a look at some companies that are known to employ best practices for user experience design, some of the big three out there, household names are the Amazon, Apple, and Google, their stocks are all doing great. Right? These are the stock prices as of earlier this week, and from what I could tell from the trending, everything was still on an uptick over the last 6 months. So, you know, these guys got to be doing something right, and again, they're all known to employ best practices for user experience, okay? Basically looking at making their customers happy. An unfortunate counterexample is looking at Samsung. And I say this as somebody who actually does have an Android phone and has been a fan of Android for a while because I'm a developer. You know, Samsung entered the smartphone market around 2010, and their strategy has largely been around producing superior hardware and features to show off that hardware. Unfortunately for them, CNN did a report on the Galaxy S4, and they said it was only a modest improvement over the S3, and they called the UX of the phone clunky, which is not something that you as a designer or developer ever want to hear applied to your products on a national network. And their stock went down 5% last year. Again, is that a direct correlation? Yeah, maybe, maybe not, but it's still something worth considering. So ROI can be admittedly hard to calculate. Anything that is somewhat of a soft discipline, if you will, like design, might be hard to measure, but it can be done. You just need to track certain metrics over time, find out what your key performance indicators are, and track them. On the Human Factors International website, there are a number of calculators out there and available that can give you some statistics to start looking at and care about. Things such as increasing your users' productivity, how much money is spent on training, or for maybe your point-of-sale application, what's the conversion rate from somebody going on the site to actually completing the action that you care about. So all these things can be tracked and measured. The bottom line to all of this is that, simply put, UX design is going to solve problems for you. It's going to make you more successful. From the pragmatic marketing survey I mentioned before, product managers talked about several of issues that they've had for dealing with their products, and UX best practices can help solve some of them. And worrying about missing the product launch dates by employing UX practices, we've already talked about how we can bring that development window in and help us hit the dates. If you're delivering features that are not used by customers, that's something that user experience research can help with, finding out what that crucial 5% of features are. And if you need features that are going to be required to close new deals, again, what are those features? Which ones are crucial and important? Where do you spend your development time on? If you've got more time in the schedule, okay, because you've employed some of these best practices, you can focus on these new features, make them successful, get them out to your existing customers. So here at ICS, kind of to close this up, as Jen mentioned in the beginning, I'm the director of our UX group. My team exists specifically to design and build great products. So we as a group have helped out a lot of companies over the years. We've created products that allow our customers to delight their customers. If you're interested in seeing how we work, you can go to ics.com and /UX video and see some more information about what our team does for you. And if you're interested in discussing any of this further, you can contact me at the information listed here, jeffl@ics.com. I've been here at this company long enough that I can get away with my first name as my email address, so you can reach me there. And with that, we would actually like to open this up to any questions that you guys might have. We've only got a few minutes left in the hour, but we can take a few questions from the audience if there are any.
Yes. Hi, Jeff. Thank you. Yep, there's a few questions, and there's even, an opinion statement as well that I'll leave to the end that maybe you can address, Jeff. But the first question we have is, could you please address the misguided concept that a user interface is a user interface regardless of the platform? So, for example, this person has worked with a company who insists that their full-screen web portal interface should be duplicated exactly on a mobile device, even down to the same non-mobile friendly controls and display layouts.
Okay, and that's actually one that we've bumped into with a number of our customers, even here on my team. From an engineer's perspective, I can see the argument, because if you're just dealing with functions, you've got function A, B, and C on one screen, function A, B, and C on another. What's the problem? You go from a big screen to a small screen, suddenly your touch target becomes really small. Something that's easy to touch on a big screen is now just a couple pixels in size on a small screen, and you're using a pointing device like a finger. It just doesn't work. I mean, there are cases where you can get away with it, but almost all the time I found the experience is going to be substandard. It's like, yeah, you might be able to make it work, but you're not going to be happy about it. And again, that's a negative experience, which is something that you want to avoid.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. We certainly hope that answered your question. The next one is, how does upfront design work with agile programming, release early and often?
You want to be able to give the UX designers some time to create a good backlog of stories to work with. It works quite well. The trick is you just got to have the UX team running a sprint or two, or more depending on the size of the project, but you want to have them running ahead of the development team. So the UX team is busy filling the backlog, putting the specs together, figuring out what's going to need to be done by the by the developers when they get to their sprint. So ideally, when the development sprint hits, the UX design sprint has already happened, the specs are in place, the assets are in place, and then the developers are good to go. We've employed that actually very successfully on a number of projects here at ICS.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. Another question is, when in the development process should we bring in a UX team?
Best case, at the beginning. Again, the sooner you can figure out what features your customers actually care about, the easier it is for you to start deploying resources to them. The sooner you know how many screens there are in the application, again, the easier it is to estimate development costs. So best case, you do it before programming even starts. Realistic case, that often doesn't happen unless you've got your own in-house team. Sometimes it's an afterthought. All is not lost at that point. Certainly a UX team can come in and do something called a heuristic analysis, look at an existing design, maybe just find some of the low-hanging fruit, things that are guaranteed to cause problems. Maybe you change around a few things, make some tweaks here and there. It won't be perfect, but it will be better than doing no design. You can even do it after product is released if you want to look at the realm of user testing. Again, looking at the product from an experience perspective, seeing what works and what doesn't, and being able to provide feedback to the team so that they can properly plan the next release of the software. So best case at the beginning, but in reality, pretty much any time in the life cycle, we can become involved.
Okay, great. And another question is, how much time should we allocate for UX on a project?
Depends on the size of the project, really. In practice, again, kind of best case, it seems that the UX time will run a third to a half of the development cycle, and again, it should start before the developers, and it finishes before the developers finish. There's certainly some concurrency in there as well. But yeah, typically a third to a half of the development time is what the UX time tends to come out to. That's a rough heuristic, but it's one that seems to work.
Okay, great. And then I had a comment from a gentleman who was more or less expressing his ideas and thoughts around this, and perhaps as I read through this, you can certainly, add to this, and it might be just from his perspective. He starts out by saying conflict of understanding and specifications. Owner-manager understands the business but not the application development process, and timelines for development versus programmer may be very good technically but does not have the direct hands-on experience in the field as an end user in the industry. Compromises and committees don't lead to a good result. Things such as political conflicts with management, in-house computing departments, outside contractors, etc. He also goes on to state that he believes that programmers and developers should spend a certain amount of time shadowing the end user to understand the business and the specific interest and needs of the customer.
Yeah, that's a very true statement. I found when I was doing programming, what really got me into the realm of human factors and appreciating this was I worked for a medical company back in the 90s, and one of the things that they actually did quite effectively was they made their engineers go out and actually go to hospitals and shadow their users, who were clinicians, doctors and nurses, see what their day-to-day life was, see how the application, or the system rather, was used out in the field. And that really hit home for me what it was that people were using the systems that I developed, what they use them for, how they use them. And it's very different than when you're just sitting in your cubicle at your desktop and just kind of working away. Seeing how things work in the field makes a huge difference. So, I highly agree with that statement.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. So does anybody have any more questions? We have another couple of minutes here before we sign off. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up then. I guess that's all the questions for today. So we'd just like to thank each and every one of you for coming. We certainly hope that you found the webinar to be of interest and of value to you. Certainly please be on the lookout for a follow-up email that will include an access to a recording of this webinar as well as some other information as well. And we certainly hope that you can join us for the future webinars in this series, and we'll notify all of you as they come about. And we just want to thank you again and just enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you so much.